Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on the CSBG Annual Report, Module 3, Community Level Efforts. For those who may not know me, I am Jackie Orr, the CSBG State Assistance Director at NASCSP. We have several presenters for today's webinar on Module 3, so I'm going to list those of the presenters for today. We're going to start with Jeannie Chaffin, the Director of the Office of Community Services, Jenae Bjelland from the Executive Director at NASCSP, Lauren Cook, the CSBG Team Leader, Rae Tamblyn, Research and Communications Analyst, both at NASCSP, Barbara Mooney, the Director of the Association of Nationally Certified ROMA Traders, and Kate Blunt of the Federal Consulting Group. But before we begin, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items with all of you. Now, all of you are on mute, so if you have any questions during the webinar, you can ask them using the chat option on the webinar toolbar. The toolbar is located on the right-hand side of your screen, and you'll see a text box where you can type a question. I just want to make sure that you select all panelists to ensure that all of the presenters can see your questions. Questions will be read aloud and answered during the question and answer portion of the webinar. But in order to keep us all on schedule, if we don't have time to respond to all of your questions during the webinar, we'll compile the questions into a frequently asked questions document following the webinar, and you will have access to those. I also want to let you know that the webinar will be recorded, and within the next few days, it'll be posted on the NASCSP website. So with all that being said, I'm now going to turn it over to one of our presenters, Kate Blunt.
Thanks, Jackie. Just wanted to alert everybody that this is one of a series of webinars. We are conducting 5 webinars to assist with your review and comment during this 60-day comment period. We have already conducted 2 webinars which were recorded and are now available on the NASCSP website. One is sort of an update and overview, gives you the big picture of what this is all about. The second one that's been recorded is on the state administration module. Since that's a brand new thing, we kind of walked through exactly what's in that module. Today, of course, we're doing Module 3 on community level. And next week, same time, we're going to be doing the individual and family module. And then on Thursday, July 14th, we'll tackle, again, the administrative module and the agency and fiscal capacity modules. Since we've already recorded some work on the administration module, we're trying to have a little bit more discussion and question and answer during the administration module. Our objective for conducting these particular webinars is threefold. We want to have all of you really understand what ROMA Next Generation is all about and the role that the annual report plays in that. The annual report is only part of the bigger picture of ROMA Next Generation. We also want you to understand the specifics of what is being proposed in the annual report. We want everybody to be very clear about each module and each segment. Some things have changed, some things are very similar, but we want you to know the specifics. And then we want you to understand really what's needed during the 60-day comment period, what we need from you in terms of feedback. So today's agenda, fourfold. We are going to review ROMA Next Generation, how we're building on the ROMA Foundation. We'll then spend most of the time talking about the draft annual report, the community level piece, kind of the current status of it, reviewing what's in the module, the clarifications and changes that have been made, and looking at the various reports and templates. There will be time for questions and answers. We'll be using the chat box to do that, and then, of course, we'll talk about next steps. So to begin us off in terms of talking about ROMA Next Generation and how we're building on the ROMA Foundation, let me turn it over to Jeannie.
Thanks, Kate. And the first thing I wanted to do today is sort of say thank you to a whole set of people, and one of those people is you, Kate. As a consultant for both NASCSP and OCS, you've been a big part of developing this for us, and we really appreciate your help. I want to say thank you to all the NASCSP staff for all your efforts, working hard, working late, trying to be creative problem solvers when people raise issues to us, and I really appreciate all your work. I want to thank the Roma Next Generation Work Group. I'm not going to list all their names. Many of them are probably on this call. They know who they are, and they're experts and leaders in our community action field and have had a lot to do with helping us develop the material for Roma Next Generation and the annual report. So I'm so thankful to them. And then finally, I want to thank, the hundreds of people who are on the call today and folks who have been paying attention to this work, who have stepped up and engaged in looking at what is being produced and caring enough about the Community Action Network to give us feedback and constructive criticism to make all this as strong and get community action ready for the future. So I have a lot of appreciation for all the work folks are doing, including the OCS staff who are behind me here busily typing away and ready to take notes when we have questions. Roma Next Generation, we're really looking to move Roma to a new level that will strengthen CSBG for the future, help us over the next 5 to 10 years be as strong as we can be, just as Roma 1.0 has really served us well over the last 20 years. In 1994, the federal government passed the Performance and Results Act, and the Community Action Agency stepped up with the Monitoring and Assessment Task Force and said, what kind of system do we want to have in community action that responds to GIPRA and the idea that organizations, all federal programs need to track results and report results out. And that network created Roma itself. It's really time for us to do that again, for us to look at what we're doing, how we work, and say, what do we want our Roma system to look like for the future? So where do we want to be as we do that? We really want OCS, states, and CAAs to use performance data to achieve greater stability and economic security for families and communities. This is really about pursuing results for families and communities. That has to be at the heart of what we do. It has to be our North Star and how we make all decisions about Roma Next Generation and the annual report. It's going to take effort, time, and money, but we really see that all as an investment in the future and our ability to do our very best for families and communities. We've got to have everybody at all levels involved. This isn't just something that the local community action agencies have to do. This is work that will be done at the state level and here at the national level. We've got to all be using the full Roma cycle, and we really want to look at using data about the people we serve, the services and strategies that we pursue, and the outcomes, and use that information for decision making. So I mentioned GIPRA was passed in 1994. In 2010, the federal government passed the GIPRA Modernization Act. And the quote here on this slide, I think, is really instructive for where not only the federal government, but public and private agencies are now when you look at performance management. We're really in a new wave of performance management that really asks folks to not just report out information externally, but to use information internally to get better. And in this quote from the Office of Management and Budget, they say to achieve breakthrough gains on priorities. And I think that's what we're all really looking for here, is breakthrough outcomes for the families that we serve and the communities that we're trying to improve. I also think it's really important to note here that OMB said in the first implementation memo on GIPRA modernization that this wasn't about trying to create fear or penalty for failing to achieve ambitious targets. We want to be ambitious, and we want people to feel like they can take on the hard stuff, and that's important whether we're talking about family outcomes or community outcomes, which we're going to focus on today. Roma Next Generation really tries to focus on integrating information. I mentioned, coordinating the information about the people we serve, the services and strategies that we provide, and the outcomes we achieve. When we look at those things together, there's so much that we can learn about our services versus looking at all those things in kind of a flat, one-dimensional, siloed way. Last week at the CAPLA conference, we had a great panel of community action folks and some community action folks from North Carolina that talked about what they learned when they looked at what outcomes they were achieving that were positive for certain groups of people. They learned that in one of their LifeWorks programs, that program was working well for folks who had a little bit higher education. They also learned that multiple face-to-face contacts really increased the chances that folks achieved economic security. So there's a lot we can learn when we look at this information in a really robust, meaningful way. And that sort of leads us to the second point on this slide, which is we really are looking for ROMA Next Generation to be about continuous quality improvement. Taking a pulse of your results and your work periodically and thinking about how you can learn from that, how you can improve what you're doing, or maybe stop doing some things that aren't working. But to be real about that, we have to recognize that it's going to require some attention to capacity at all levels again, federal, state, and local. We're going to have to look at our data systems. Some of us are going to have data systems that are ready to go, and some of us are going to probably need some help in upgrading and modernizing our data systems. It's going to take leadership, executive directors in agencies that have really shown progress in this space. It's been a lot because the executive director was leading that, so we've got to look at leadership. We've got to look at staff training. The good news, we won't get into this too much today, is we have time to achieve this, this vision of ROMA Next Generation. We're not going to be about implementing all of this October 2016. We're going to allow time for folks to get to this place that I'm talking about today. So more on that later. But mentioning that we need everybody at all levels to use the ROMA cycle, I want to hand it over to Barbara to sort of give us a little bit of a primer and a reminder about the ROMA cycle and how that fits into ROMA Next Generation today. Barbara?
Thanks, Jeannie. As you see on the screen, the ROMA cycle starts with assessment, goes through planning, implementation, achievement of results, and evaluation. And ROMA Next Generation is going to build on each of these cycle elements and help us to dig deeper to become more professional in our performance management system. So, for example, in the assessment phase, we'll be asking ROMA Next Generation questions like, what does the data tell us about the needs in our specified community, and what is it that's reasonable for us to address? Many times when we look at the assessments, we see a combination of these large community-level issues that are identified. There are lack of living wage jobs, there's low housing stock. And yet when we translate that into the next phase, which I'll get to in a second, we see that we move to a family level response. But in ROMA Next Generation, we're saying, look at your assessment data and think about how you can either address this big picture independently or in partnership with other organizations. And we'll talk more about this throughout this presentation. When you move to planning, you are going to be looking at your theory of change, both the national theory of change and your local theory of change, looking at your core principles, the principles that you have identified as being most important to you to help and to help guide your planning process. How are we going to strategically respond to individual and family needs and also to community needs? What impact do we want to have? What are our targets? And then what services and initiatives are we going to select? So these are a little bit deeper questions that follow the current planning process. Once we get into implementing services and strategies to produce results, we need to think about the uniqueness of community action again, and we want to know are our strategies and are our services and strategies moving towards certain outcomes that we can identify in the newly developed national performance indicators. And do we have a process for observing this progress? In some cases, when we get into the implementation phase, it's all about, well, let's deliver the services, but we also need to be thinking of, let's deliver the services for a specific purpose, and how do we observe that progress going forward? And then if we're using if we're moving people forward, how are we using the data that we identified to make changes as we need to? When we start then to report on our results, we're observing and reporting on the outcomes and the progress towards the goals that we've set for ourselves. We're looking at both community and family level national performance indicators. And we want to be thinking about how those indicators actually move our whole network towards the agency goals in our local theory of change, and also the national goals in the national theory of change. And the ROMA Next Generation question is, how do these specific services and strategies actually support and produce the outcomes that we need? So making the connections is part of this piece. And of course, in the last piece, we want to look at the data and compare with our benchmarks. We want to say, did the outcomes really identify the needs that we said were our community needs in our assessment? Did we track success? How well did we do that? Did we meet our targets? And then really the big questions, what's changed for the people we serve, and what's changed for our community? What outcomes were achieved, for whom, and as the result of what we did, and how do we improve the process? And all of this then taken together goes back to the assessment again, and we're looking then at reassessing based on what we learned throughout all the cycle. So I'm turning it over to Jenae now to talk a little bit about where we are.
Okay, so what we've heard is a lot of the foundations on why we started to have this conversation about ROMA and ROMA Next Generation, that it's been a good 20 years since we've had a good update, and that with OCS's performance management framework, we wanted to ensure that we looked at every level of reporting and accountability, but also how we tell our story. So one of the first things that we did is that we ensured that as we were building ROMA Next Generation, we had it in line with the organizational standards, the state and federal accountability measures, and that we wanted to ensure that all of these components work together. As Barbara had gone through the ROMA cycle, we recognized that we wanted to also enhance that to talk about how all of these pieces really do fit together, that it's not a separate something that you have to do, that it's really integral to all of the work that we do in community action. So ROMA Next Generation brings the full assumptions and concepts that we have about our community action network together. We put it together with the theory of change. Now, the theory of change is not part of this this OMB comment period, but we will be modifying it throughout this time frame, making improvements. And that's what I really love about this network. So where are we at with the CSBG annual report? We have posted a couple of webinars already to our website. When the formal 60-day OMB comment period hits, which was June 16th, to go over the whole process on where we're at. So we hope that you go out and that you do look at those. As we've mentioned, today's session is going to be specifically about community and the work that we've done in community. So in our initial feedback period, and this isn't something that's required, this is something that OCS really wanted to do because this was the first time we've really looked at ROMA and the CSBG annual report as a whole. And we wanted to ensure that we didn't do anything in a vacuum, that we really had input from all levels, federal, state, national, local, on what we were pulling together. So during the initial feedback period, and that was March 3rd through April 13th, we heard from a lot of you. We're going to quickly go through some of those survey results a little later, but I wanted to let you know what we've been doing since March 3rd. We had been reviewing all of the feedback that we received, and this is feedback in the surveys themselves, in letters, in calls, and in emails, and that we've been meeting OCS, NASCSP, and the ROMA Next Generation Work Group as well, to really look at what modifications we can make to the annual report, what clarifications we need to do, what kind of messaging do we need to release. That has led us to enter into this official Federal Register Notice comment period, which began June 16th. This is the 60-day comment period that runs through August 15th. The Dear Colleague letter was published on June 17th, and you have a hyperlink on the screen here. We will be posting this webinar and the slides to our websites as well, so you can have all of this information. This is really your time to have a voice, to look at all of the modifications that we've done to the report and to provide us some additional insight as to how this affects you at the state, at the local level, anything that we can do to clarify, to make it easier. You know, sometimes we have really great ideas, but when the rubber meets the road, they don't quite work. And so that's how we've done a lot of modifications to this community section for the Module 3 that we're going to be going into next. Barbara, I'm turning it back over to you to start talking about the community level efforts.
Okay, thank you. Yes, so we know, as Jeannie said earlier, that we've been engaged in community level efforts over time, and we want to be able to tell the story of this community level impact of the CSBG funding. So what we're looking at with the looking at a next generation approach to our outcome reporting is a menu of measures to track the network's performance with respect to what the strategies that we do at the community level do to make those changes. So we've created a series of national performance indicators on the community activities that would relate to community action, the whole community action activities, and not just the CSBG funded activities, as we have always done with the NPIs. This data is going to help the agencies and the states analyze what's working, and then really to help identify how to improve our impact going forward. In last fall, OCS and NASCSP pulled together a work group, and that we were looking at all of the elements of ROMA Next Generation. We're looking at the theory of change, the national goals, the revised national performance indicators, and so on. And so there was a specific group that worked on community level data. And a couple of the things that we noticed was that the data was disjointed in the Goal 2 and Goal 3 reporting in the national performance indicators currently. It didn't add up to any big outcomes. There wasn't a coherent community level story being told. One of the NPIs is about low-income people who participate in formal community organizations, and that number is very low. And it's actually less than the number of agencies. And so we thought, oh, that seems like it must be an underreporting. And why would that be? Is it that the local agencies don't understand the NPIs, or that this kind of information isn't tracked well at the local level? Or what is it? What is it that's really causing those low numbers? One of the things that we looked at was that we weren't seeing any reports on these big picture items like the increase in the number of young people entering college, or can we track an increase in the median income, or other population level indicators at the community level that many of our community action agencies are engaged in. And we saw the NPIs really as a little snapshot. They are, there's no real context. So we started to talk about this baseline measure that could be compared to later. So the example on the screen is housing units. So how many housing units would we want to create? We need to know how many there are now. Without an expectation of what you plan to do, it's really not, you can't really tell whether or not you're successful. So if an agency says they've created so many housing units or so many jobs, we don't really know if that's good or not. How many jobs or how many housing units were needed? Why did the agency think that they were going to work in this area? What was it that decided them to work on this particular project? So we need to be able to think of add that into our reporting. So if we have a large number of data elements that are related to individuals and families, but the number of agencies that are reporting on things like the community level impact of increasing the number of living wage jobs, we aren't seeing that. We aren't seeing that from many agencies at all. We believe that agencies are contributing to these kind of efforts, but it seems we hear that, well, we can't take credit for that work because we're just part of a bigger picture. And so we really need to help people think in a next generation way about how they are involved in this kind of work. So the numbers that we have really don't show us that CAPs are engaged in these larger systemic issues that we really know they are engaged in. So we started to really think about how we could help agencies talk about their community effort. And what we heard were that there were really 3 different approaches to community level change. And one of them is independent impact, where the local agency works by themselves on an issue. They're not really involved in a coordinated effort. Like an agency might have a housing corporation that does develop their own housing units, and they do that independently. But then often community actions agencies partner with other organizations in a specific way to achieve a certain community change. And then more broadly, community action agencies are involved in collective impact strategies. They could be the backbone organization or a key contributing member. And this is a multi-sector committed group of agencies and people that have a common agenda to solve a specific community social problem. And this is a real structured form of collaboration. So we thought we need to be able to give people an opportunity to talk about their community change in all these different approaches. So here are some things that we identified that the community measures needed to do. They need to capture the scope or the scale of the intervention. How big is the intervention? And what does that mean? What do we expect that intervention will be? That we want to show movement on these large, complex community or systems level that we identify in our needs assessment all the time. So what do we do about those? How do we show that we're doing something about the things that we're identifying? And that we show progress over time. We know community change is really, it takes time to make these changes. These are big things. These are big, wicked problems, and we need to have time to do that. So we need to include measures that allow us to show that. And it has to be easy for us to understand so that there can be a meaningful summary at the national level, so that all of these individual efforts across the country can be identified in some way to rise to a national report. So we asked a lot of people questions about this, and we got some feedback, and Lauren is going to talk to us about this feedback.
Thank you, Barbara, and hello, everyone. If you think back to March, you may have looked over some of our surveys. We had a series of 5 so that we could hear your feedback on each of the components that were included in that initial feedback period. And as you can see on the screen, we had a very great response rate across the network from all levels. Today, we're going to focus in on what we heard in Survey 2 because we are thinking about community level work today. You'll see we had 731 responses. This is across all levels, local, state, and national. In addition to the responses on the surveys, we heard from a lot of you in kind of personalized feedback letters, which were extremely helpful to us as we were reviewing all of the components. So first, we're going to take a look today at the quantitative data. So those are kind of the number or ratings that you all assign to each of the pieces. And then we'll give you some of the kind of key issues that we identified in the comments and some of your letters. Before I review that, I just want to kind of echo what Jeannie said earlier on behalf of NASCSP. We were so appreciative of all of the time and effort that everyone spent not only reviewing the pieces, but completing all of these surveys. I know a lot of people spent a lot of time on this. In the community survey, one of our first questions was about the community level efforts in progress tool. We asked how well that tool allowed you to capture the work you do for communities over time, describe the impact of the work that you do independently, in partnership, and through collective impact initiatives. And you can see in that kind of first column on the left that about 50% of you rated this either well or very well. We also asked you to tell us how well the list of strategies in each domain or section describes all of the work you do to ensure communities where people with low incomes are healthy and offer economic opportunity. So you can see through each domain, the ratings, again, were at about 50% for well or very well. And again, for emergency management and the categories on civic engagement. We also asked you to tell us about how well the indicators in each domain allow you to capture the impact of the work you do to ensure communities where people with low incomes live are healthy and offer economic opportunity. Your responses varied a little bit more in this section, but we did see that they range from about 41% to 59%, rating it well or very well. And as I said before, we took a very close look at all of your comments in each of the surveys that helped us really identify what the key issues were for each of the components. We heard you say that the question asking an agency to explain why it does not do community level work is inappropriate. That was included on the community level efforts in progress tool. We heard that some of the reports were kind of disjointed and needed to be streamlined. There needed to be clearer definitions of independent, partnership, and collective impact. We also heard from a lot of you who took a very close look at that community level efforts in progress tool, that there was no place to report if that initiative folded or took a different direction. Another concern that arose was if we don't do community level work, would you be dropped from the network? And again, when you were reviewing the collective impact reporting tool, there were some concerns about the reporting and the behavior and systems change. When you reviewed the community level strategies during the initial feedback period, there were some suggestions to merge the strategies list with the community in progress tool. We also received some excellent, very concrete recommendations for strategies that we should add to the list. And for the community level NPIs, there was concern that some of the NPIs, especially population or social indicators, did not reflect the work that community action agencies do and might be beyond the scope of community action agencies. We heard you say that an agency alone can't address some of these outcomes when you're thinking about community level work. Also that for the baseline requirements, that it might not be reasonable for you to find the data you would need to identify the baseline. And then some fear around small numbers, that there would be a really low level of reporting on some of the indicators that we included in that initial packet. So right now we just kind of reviewed the key issues that you told us, and we want to let you know how we address those and how we incorporated those into our changes. So with that, I'll turn this over to Jeannie. Thanks, Lauren. So I'm going to take a minute to remind folks that they can add questions now. So if you're hearing things and we're not addressing them to the full extent of your satisfaction, please send us a question. We have folks who are compiling those so that we can answer them. And I saw that somebody had typed in that they really liked the ROMA bubble graph. And that gives me an opportunity to fix an error I made at the start of this, which is I didn't recognize Barbara Mooney for the work that she's done, and that bubble slide is an example of her work with NASCSP. So I want to give Barbara an appreciation too and set the record straight for that error. So add your questions in. And what I'm going to do now, as Lauren said, she flagged the key issues that we heard from the surveys and the comments. I'm going to go over some clarifications that I think address those key issues, some changes we've made that address those issues. But if you have issues that you don't think that I'm covering, type in a question and we'll try to address it. So community change is really complex. We all know that. But it's so important to be able to create community change. That's really how we get long-term improvements in communities. And poverty today, the causes of poverty, really call all of us to build our capacity to create community-level change. So that is part of what's driving a lot of the information and the structure of this community module. Just a little piece of history here. I think when the Monitoring and Assessment Task Force created the first set of ROMA measures, there were family measures and community measures and agency measures. The family measures were pretty strong, and over time got even stronger, I think, over the years. We strengthened those with experience. And the community level measures, because they often are so challenging, and that is challenging work, really never got as strong, I think, as our family measures. So part of what we're also trying to do is to build out the community measures a little bit. But we always want to remember that the measures are a menu, and no agency has to do all of those. But the first critical clarification that I want to make is that, you know, our theory of change, which I think most folks have seen, the national theory of change, our history, our knowledge and experience, and above all, the current CSBG Act, all reflect the importance of addressing poverty at both the individual and the family, individual and family and community level. And we need robust measures in all of those spaces to really show what we're achieving and to learn what's working and not working. So we're really endeavoring here to have a more robust set of community level measures that really gets at some of the complex causes of poverty. So individual agencies are not expected to address the complex causes of poverty alone, just, you know, and one individual community action agency working by itself, or overnight in one program year. Part of what we have tried to do with the new community module is to show that community level change, addressing wicked problems, takes time. And there's a lot of functionality that has been built into the community level module to accommodate for this. As I said, it's really important in today's world to for community action agencies to look very deeply at the needs and strengths of their community, the conditions in their community, and think about developing partnerships where they can help address these complex problems. And we want to make sure we have plenty of space and plenty of structure that allows agencies to work in partnership, to work independently, to work as a collective on these issues. So additions to the community reporting, as I said, recognizing that community level work takes time and that the local CA determines and defines what community may look like or what community they're focusing on. Some of the key issues that Lauren outlined really relate to folks being concerned about a lack of flexibility or being required to do things. And we've tried very hard because it is required in the CSBG Act, it's part of our vision, it's part of our history, to allow a great full maximum local flexibility and local determination. And that's reflected in a community action agency would pick the NPIs that work for them based on their needs assessment, their strategic plan, their community action plan, that whole process that Barbara went through earlier. They would identify the particular area that they're going to be working in. So if they set an outcome about getting more kids, low-income kids, to graduate high school, they're going to identify what area. They have the flexibility for that to be one school or one school district or a rural county if that's what the community action agency and their partners want. So maximum local flexibility is represented in many different places in the community module. So those of you who had some sense that we were requiring certain things in the community space, we want to make sure you understand that actually when we get done with all the CSBG performance management framework pieces, and that's the organizational standards as well as ROMA Next Gen and the annual report, I think we will have lifted up and even strengthened local flexibility for CSBG. Again, I've already said this a couple times, but it's really an important clarification. Agencies only report on the MPIs that are relevant to achieving the goals and outcomes set by that CAA based on those local needs and conditions. So when this process works as it should, and as many of you know, you do your needs assessment, you identify what the problems are in the community, you identify what kinds of outcomes you want to achieve based on those problems, and it's those outcomes that you report on, that you track, that you assess and decide how are we doing on that outcome, what do we need to change, what do we need to improve, and then eventually report out. So that's very, very important. So those are a few critical clarifications. It's important for folks to be clear on, and then we want to highlight some of the changes that we've made based on your feedback and surveys and comment letters. That I would say that, I mean, I think when if folks were to look at the earlier packet from April and look at the community module now, they will see vast changes. They look very different. We took the feedback about streamlining and simplifying to heart, and folks really worked on how can we make this functionality more responsive to the needs of the agencies and to the feedback that we got. So there's been extensive modification and simplification. We're going to collect basic information on community level initiatives that you have identified outcomes you want to achieve in. So if you go back to my example about the needs assessment and setting outcomes, those are the kind of community level strategies and that you will be reporting on in the community module. We think that this better showcases the connection between initiatives and outcomes, that it demonstrates how initiatives would be reported on over time. And so Rae is going to walk you through some examples of this later, but there'll be auto-population that will carry information from year to year, so you won't, you know, if you have a 5-year project, you're building your reporting and story out over time in the module. And it demonstrates how outcomes would be tracked and captured. So we've got some really neat things that we've added to help improve functionality and simplification. We've removed the question, I think somebody else might have mentioned this, about, you know, what if you're not doing community level work, why are you not doing that? That caused a lot of angst for folks, and that, you know, we just got rid of it. So that's easily done. You may recall that in the earlier version of the annual report, we had some tools and some reporting forms around collective impact. The concept of collective impact remains. We want to make sure that if folks are pursuing work via a collective impact strategy, that there's a place to report that. But some of the complex tools that we had included earlier are greatly simplified. That's not simple to say, but simplified. And that there'll be pop-ups that, you know, that collective impact, some of the collective impact questions won't appear unless you indicate you're doing collective impact. So that helps to simplify things. Somebody, I don't know who it was, but that you'll know who you were out there, made the suggestion that we should integrate the strategies list into the community level initiatives module, and we've done that. So now the strategies are just a pick list when you're going through the community level initiative status page. Rae, I'm sure, will show us that in a few minutes. And we capture the number and types of initiatives that are implemented, and this really underscores that initiatives are connected to and related to community level outcomes. And then, you know, again, to emphasize this issue that, you know, this is a menu, you know, it's a pick list. If there's the right thing on the list, you know, you pick it. But if you need to add your own other NPI or indicator, you can do that. Because there's no way we could know how all the different community groups will decide to measure some of this complex work. And we may not have the right NPI here for the local community work that your partners are doing. And so that other is really important. So in section A, community level initiatives, we've got a new page. We're calling it Community Level Initiatives Homepage. That's created to address concerns that you all raised in the initial feedback. It'll list your ongoing and your completed initiatives and is the starting place for adding a community level initiative. We've got a status page where you'll go in and provide updates, and that'll be data entry, auto-population. There's data elements there about the outcome, the project year, what kind of strategy you're using, what type of, is it a partnership, collective impact, all of that kind of thing. We also have some ways that folks can talk about or select some data elements if a project ends up sort of fading out or not achieving its goal. That was feedback that we got, that does happen. And in the spirit of wanting folks to tackle complex issues, sometimes you will fail and stub your toe and things won't work the way you planned, and there needs to be space to talk about that. That's a learning. We all can learn from that. There's some supplemental data drop-down lists and pop-up windows, and we'll look at those more here in a minute when we dive in deeper. The indicators, some of the indicators were revised or reordered, or, you know, we did some word tweaks. We did eliminate a few things that we felt like we got strong enough feedback that, you know, we really needed to rethink, and we did some really deep thinking here at OCS with NASCSP on some of those indicators. As folks have said earlier, there's been some raising of concerns about social or population indicators. and we've taken a look at some of the indicators that people may tend to see as social or population indicators. What I do want to reiterate here is that depends a lot on how a community action agency might identify the area that they're working in. If a community action agency was trying to reduce teen pregnancy in a whole region or even a big city, you might say, yeah, that's a social or population indicator. But we're allowing flexibility for a community action agency along with the school and the health department and the YWCA and many others who might decide to realign resources, try to bring in new resources, and over a 5-year period, they may reduce the number of teen pregnancies in a particular school or school district. That is a more doable thing if a community decides to get behind it and to move the needle on that item. And so there's a lot of what if in some of these NPIs, you know, and it depends on how the agency and the community identify their outcomes and how they identify the area that they're going to work in on whether you really would have a social or population indicator. I also want to say that, you know, we're very open. You know, we're in a 60-day comment period on feedback on other indicators that would be good, and I'm going to give an example of this. We have an indicator about you know, measuring, improving the number of low-income kids that get into that graduate high school or that get into college. I think we have both of those. That may be the right fit for a particular school district, a particular neighborhood. It may not be. A group that is trying to achieve that goal might rather have an indicator of their work as they are increasing third grade reading level, because they have looked at the evidence and looked at the research and determined that third grade reading level and improving third grade reading level is a predictor of high school graduation. So what would I do if I was a community action agency and my collective impact group had just, you know, we're working on improving high school graduation, but we know that to do that, you have to improve third grade reading level, and we're going to improve third grade reading level over the next 4 years. I would add that as another NPI, and maybe I wouldn't pick improve high school graduation, or maybe I would make that a very long-term goal. Or maybe it's kindergarten attendance, you know. I think that the point here is that that local group, that community action agency leading those local folks who are trying to solve the complex problem have plenty of flexibility. That group is going to set some kind of outcome. They should. They shouldn't be working if they don't know what they're trying to achieve. And there's plenty of flexibility for that local group's outcome to be added here. What else do we want to talk about? I want to talk a little bit about baseline. One of the things that we heard from folks was some concern about in some of the indicators that we might want to work on, that there may not even be any baseline data available. We may not even know we know there's a problem, but we don't have extensive data or available data for a particular area that we want to work in, and we don't want that to hamper our innovation and our flexibility. So we have created some functionality in the current module that allows agencies to indicate, we know this is a problem because of X, and we're working on it because of X, but we can't identify a baseline at this time. And maybe we're going to have some plans to do that down the road, but we know this is important, and part of what we're going to work on here is fleshing out the extent of the problem, perhaps. So we've added that flexibility. I also want to this is a good place to make a critical clarification about, we are not intending to roll up across agencies and across the states and nationally some of the community level information like baseline. If you tried to add up all the baseline numbers from all the community action agencies, you'd have junk. What we will be rolling up is information about what community areas agencies are working in, what progress they're making, how many agencies we have achieving. I think I think it's much more important for the local agency to have information for their local stakeholders, but we are obviously going to use this information for national and state stakeholders. If we're able to say things like, we have 20 community action agencies working in the education domain on improving low-income high school graduation, and 15 of those had made progress this year, that's a pretty powerful story to put in the congressional report. We cannot say anything like that now. So don't think you might have a little angst about, oh, they're going to add up all this data and what meaning it has. We get that some of this data can't be added up. So that's important to note here. We now have 36 national performance indicators to measure the performance of community level work. As I said, we have another indicator in each domain, and the community level indicators are organized by 6 domains. And on our next slide, we have those domains listed. You'll see those as you go into the module, and there's pick lists for you to identify what domain you're working in. And just as an example, we've listed out the employment community level NPIs. You can see here what some of the NPIs look like. Some of this will look similar to previous, and there'll be some things that, like example number 5 has been deleted, and we've added another work NPI, another jobs NPI, but we did take out the decreased rate of unemployment benefit because we did think that that was something that was pretty difficult for community action agencies to measure or take on. So then you can kind of see what the employment initiatives would look like. These would be the strategies. Again, there'll be a pick list for you to pick what strategies you're working on, and we'll see that here in a moment. And then just to highlight some additional modifications that have been made and sort of summarize these again, we've created the community level initiatives homepage and status page in place of the community level efforts and progress report. It's streamlined, it integrates the strategies, and there's lots of auto population that Rae's going to talk about more here in a moment. We've revised the community level indicators. We've added the flexibility for baseline, added functionality to reinforce that it is a menu, and you pick the ones that are appropriate for your agency, and then try to reduce some duplication across the NPIs. So I'm going to hand it over to Rae to show us some of the actual reporting forms.
Thank you, Jeannie. I just want to reinforce, first of all, that we did hear from, as Lauren mentioned, over 700 of you around these community components. And so we have modified these tools and the reporting forms themselves to really better streamline and showcase the connections between all of these various pieces. We heard from you that they felt somewhat disjointed, and so we've put a lot of work into making the connections much more clear. And so we've really simplified this. And I would also encourage you, if you have not already, to look at the NASCSP site and go to the supplemental tools page. We have also built example Excel forms to showcase how these actually would be interactive. So in the Adobe, in the PDF packet, it's a very static packet, and so I really want to take this opportunity to talk more about how they'll actually interact with each other. And again, we have built interactive examples for you to better underscore the connections between all of these pieces. So if we start with this home page, this will be where you begin all of your ongoing
community-level initiatives. And I want to underscore that initiatives is what we're using to talk about everything that is ongoing or concluding to achieve an outcome at the community level. And these are going to be supported by the strategies. And so we've really tried to design this homepage to show how each of these initiatives has your ultimate expected outcome. There's your domain that you're working within, and then you have the duration and the year in which you are working. As Jeannie mentioned, these are complicated initiatives that are addressing challenges in a community that may take a significant amount of time. So we are attempting to capture that, the ongoing element, as well as find the ways in which we can quantify and be able to talk at a state and national level about the differences and what people are currently working on. It tells a strong story of progress. So if we're looking at this current screen, this would auto-populate with an initiative with your summary that was entered in prior years, and you would have the capacity to simply click Update. And so you'll see that these have the summary data. It would be all of your initiatives that you have reported either in prior years or are intending to add new. And so you would be able to click Update this initiative, and it would open the community level initiative status page, which will contain pre-populated information and allow you to also update your information for this reporting year. And this will be the same window that will open if you had a new initiative. So we've really attempted to streamline this process. So if you were to click Add New, you would have a pop-up window that shows up right here on your screen, and you would be able to check the box right there on the page to say if this is an independent initiative, an initiative that's done in partnership, or if it's a collective impact initiative. And then it would open a new page. So you would be already selecting some of this information before you got to your status page. So within this status page, you'll be able to add a new year using, again, functional links that would auto-populate year 1, year 2, etc. And a lot of this will be pre-populated if you have already filled it out in an earlier year, or it will be year 1 if this is a new initiative. And you'll have the opportunity to manually enter information, and some of this will only need to be entered once, unless it changes. So for example, your issue or your domain, you would only select that in the first year, and that would continue to populate in the subsequent years. Similarly, your ultimate expected outcome would be selected in your first year as you establish what ultimate outcome and indicator you would be reporting on. And then you would be able to select your target community as well. The baseline, as Jeannie mentioned, we have made this more flexible and offered the opportunity to indicate, and again, this would be updated by year as your initiative has evolved. So you could either, in your immediate year, you could have already your baseline number and your source, which you would provide to us, or you would have the opportunity to provide the fact that you are working to establish a baseline during the reporting period, and that may be something that is an ongoing effort between you and your community partners in the first few years of a long-term project, for example. Similarly, you would be updating your expected duration, so we would have a sense of how long some of these community initiative work will take. So we could take it to the congressional reports, for example, and say that we have multiple community action agencies working on initiatives that would take 7+ years or 4 to 5 years, so that we could establish a sense of how long some of these complicated projects may take. As Jeannie mentioned and Lauren mentioned as well, we heard from you that sometimes initiatives end early and sometimes they end as planned, and we have really attempted to allow you to provide information on whether your initiative is proceeding as planned by the years that you're projecting, or if it has ended early. And if you have ended early, we also offer a comment box to allow you to reflect on lessons learned and possibly what may have changed within your community or within that initiative. Similarly, we've also integrated the strategies. As we understand that there are multiple strategies that may be implemented to support an ongoing initiative or to achieve that final outcome. And so for those who have your annual report packet printed out, those would be on pages 33 to 36. And so the way that we have to present these in a static form is as separate pages, but again, similarly to the way that many of these have been built, is this would be a pop-up window, and you would basically go through and check and manually enter. And I believe we have an example of that a couple slides further. Yes, so this would be an example of a strategy pop-up window. So you would have selected that you have strategies, and this window would pop up, and you would be able to check and enter your number, save and close, and it would return you to the status page. So we definitely want to underscore that this is a very interactive reporting form, and so it will all show up there for you, and you won't need to click on and click off and go to a variety of different reporting forms. So that would need to be updated manually every year as well, since we understand that not every strategy continues over the duration of the project, and you may need to refine or choose different strategies as your project or initiative continues. For those who had indicated on that very first status page that you were doing an independent, you will not be asked to answer all of these questions, but for those who are doing a partnership or a collective impact initiative, you will also be asked to fill out additional information. And we do want to note that this would be optional for a partnership initiative, but it will be somewhat required for a collective impact initiative. And for those of you who have done a deep dive into that collective impact tool that we provided during the initial comment period, you'll see that a lot of these are going to be similar. Is there a backbone infrastructure? Were there mutually reinforcing activities established? And again, this will be updated over time as you move forward in establishing those continuous forms of communication in your shared measurements, for example. I do want to note that you will have the option to indicate if you have interim outcomes or final outcomes to report. For a longer term initiative, you may have interim outcomes that you want to report as you achieve, or at the end of your initiative, you may have the final outcomes to report that you indicated when you first began your project. So at the bottom of the screen, you will have the option to save and close, which would return you to that home page, and you would again see the summary status of all of your ongoing initiatives. And this new initiative that you've just added would then show up after you have saved it. You would also have the ability to save and add a new initiative, which would take you to that same pop-up on whether this was a partnership or a collective impact, so you don't necessarily have to keep going backwards. You can just continue to enter your information and move smoothly through a reporting form. Similarly, you have the option to save and report on your indicators, which would only show up if you have checked that you have outcomes to report on. So once you have indicated you have outcomes upon which to report, you would hit save and report on indicators, and that would move you into the NPI reporting form. As I mentioned, you have the option of moving smoothly through this reporting form, so you could either report on each initiative as you achieve indicators, or you may end up on this landing page, which is again underscoring the fact that this is a menu of outcomes that you may be achieving. So you would have the option of selecting within this form the indicators upon which you wish to report. And as you can tell, this is the full and complete menu, and you would simply select those that are applicable to you and hit report on the indicators. And that would take you to the NPI reporting form, which would also be interactive. And as you can see, some of this will be auto-populated based on that first chart that you filled out. If you provided a number in your baseline, that will auto-populate, and then you will only fill in 2 columns, I believe. We've ended up on 2 columns, and everything else you can see will be auto-calculated or auto-populated for you. And I think that was the summary of the annual report, or the community level changes that we've done to these annual report forms.
Thanks, Rae. We're getting very close to the Q&A section. We're going to go over a few more items, but if you can start entering in your questions in the chat box, that'll help us have a little bit more time to answer any questions that you have. We want to make sure everyone's aware of the 2 upcoming webinars. Our next one will be July 6th, where we'll review Module 4 on individual and family level. And the next one will be July 14th on Modules 1 and 2, State Administration and Agency Expenditures, Capacity, and Resources. We also want to make sure everyone knows how to access the CSBG annual report that is up for comment right now. What you see on the screen is a copy of the Dear Colleague letter that OCS published on June 17th. This is accessible on their website. The link is at the top of the screen. You can also access this on the NASCSP website. Within the Dear Colleague letter, there is a link to the Federal Register notice. There's guidance on how to submit comments, the email address to submit your comments to, suggestions for how to format those comments. There's also a lot of information about this initiative overall, so I encourage everyone to review that.
So, Lauren, something else I would encourage folks to look at in the Dear Colleague is there's a couple of footnotes. There's one that is a literature review that our Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation did on continuous quality improvement. It has some really great information in it. What are the 6 key conditions to creating a continuous quality learning or environment? It's really good. And then the IM that we read from OMB is referenced in that Dear Colleague too. So take a look at the Dear Colleague.
And at the bottom of that Dear Colleague, you'll see 4 appendix items. The first one is an overview of the feedback and modifications that we've made since the initial feedback period. There's also the theory of change that you reviewed during the initial feedback period. The PDF version of the Dear Colleague is available, and then that last attachment, the annual report packet, that's the packet that you'll actually be reviewing and commenting on.
And it's important to note that the email address for submitting comments is in the Dear Colleague, so please use that email address.
We also want to make sure everyone knows that you can access this information on the NASCSP website. We have the links to the Dear Colleague and Federal Register notice, but we also have some additional resources for you to support your review during this 60-day comment period. We'll post all of the recordings of the live webinars, and we also have the recordings from those webinar recordings we've done earlier before the comment period started. To support your review, we have the Excel spreadsheets available, examples of how this information would roll up to the state and national level. We have posted the modified collective impact tool. We have the link to a Mythbusters blog. We have posters of all of the components to help you kind of visually see all of these items. We have crosswalks to help you compare the CSBGIS and the current or proposed CSBG annual report. And then all of the resources that were posted during the initial feedback period are still available on our website.
Lauren, I think it's really important that folks go and look at the Excel spreadsheet for the community level initiatives homepage and status page, because that's where you will get the full picture that has been streamlined. The screenshots that Rae showed are good, but you don't understand the context unless you really look at that Excel. So before anybody comments negatively about that community level initiatives, be sure you've looked at the Excel spreadsheet on NASCSP's website, and you may decide you like it better than you initially thought.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we're now at the point of being able to do some questions and answers. We've already been getting some questions up on the chat. We'll start trying to answer those. Anything we don't get through, we will post. as questions and answers, but I think we can just start at the beginning and kind of walk through them. As we're answering these, please, if you have more questions, just type them in and we'll continue. Can we go to the top?
Sure.
Okay. So, first question was, are the annual report package and this presentation available on the NASCSP site? Yes, we just said where they are. You can get them on OCS or the NASCSP site. If we use social indicators by allowing CAAs to define different bases against which they measure a rate, does it lead to disjointed data?
I think we probably addressed that a little bit in my comment about we're not rolling up baselines, right. We're not rolling up numbers.
Right. Okay, third question. What if our community, the people experiencing homelessness in our shelters, are a large part of community?
I think this goes to, again, you get to select what you're really focusing on and where in your community you're focusing those initiatives. That it could be that homelessness is across your full service area, but that you're only targeting specific neighborhoods, and that's that flexibility. It's a local determination.
The fourth question, what if states want to require agencies to set targets or achieve outcomes in certain or all community MPIs, and if they don't perform well, sanction them, perhaps move to terminate?
Well, I think this goes directly to what the purpose of the block grant is, and when I say that, you know, we're driven by the CSBG Act, the most basic part of that is that it's for the local agencies to determine what outcomes they're going to address. So basically in that scenario, the state is breaking the law. And if that were to happen, that, you know, OCS would have to get involved and help the, you know, I think it's, I can't imagine a state, I've interacted with all 50 states that would think that any agency would be able to work on all of the community NPIs. And I think the states understand the purpose of the block grant. So, you know, I think that is not probably going to happen, but obviously anytime a state steps outside of the big playing field they have in the block grant, you know, that there's a way for that to be addressed.
We do want to see that local agencies are setting targets before they actually start collecting information. That's part of that community needs assessment process, the strategic planning, and the whole ROMA cycle. But I would really address your concerns back to the quote that Jeannie found for the GEFRA modernization 2010 that talks about the fact that it's without fear or penalty, that we go into some of these uncharted areas to see what we can do, especially with community that's a huge lift. And we want to see our work, but it shouldn't be that you expect to have 100% change overnight. It's going to take time.
I guess finally, Kate, I would say there are checks and balances. And, you know, even when a state, proceeds to terminate a community action agency, there's an appeal process and OCS review, you know, if the agency requests OCS review. So we have some checks and balances to keep things in line.
Thank you. Next question was the terms initiative and strategy seem to be interchanging. What is the difference between them? I think that got explained a bit, but I do think we were a little loose in some of the slides, so we will go back and clarify some of that. Rae, you want to say a little more?
Yeah, just as a quick distinction, the initiative is the project that is either intended to achieve the outcome and part of your ongoing effort, if you will, and the strategies are what you are implementing or doing to support your initiative and achieve that final outcome.
So we will make sure we're clearer in our presentation of that. Please discuss the distinction between percent and rate as used in the forms. Someone want to tackle that?
You know, it's really dependent on each indicator and the information that we have. In some cases, we have the number of percent change. So that's what we're really looking for. In other areas, we are looking for there to be a rate change, and if that's the case, we're providing the backup documentation and definitions for that. So it's not a quick and easy answer over a webinar, but if you have a very specific question or concern, do not hesitate to contact us, and we'll look at providing some additional clarification.
There is a lot of data out there in various communities at different levels that provide rates of things. So that's something you can pick up and use. So that's why we continue to use in some places the rates. there is data out there, and some people have already done it.
And it is a reason why we looked at, when we did the initial feedback period, we had all of the indicators in Word, and then we did build, we didn't need to, but we built what the reporting forms would look like, because we realized that language was critical, and that once you put it in a reporting form, some of the language had to change in order to make the reporting work. So we hope that we caught all of that, but we may not have. So that's where we do appreciate your thorough feedback and look at this.
Next question is, what level of training and technical assistance is planned to ensure people understand what it means to do collective impact and how to appropriately use social indicators?
So I'm going to answer this in a broader sense. That, you know, that's a very particular training need, collective impact, and indicators or measures. Let me talk about where we're at right now with training and technical assistance, because we have lots of needs even beyond collective impact. You know, we've got training needs around organizational standards. We've got you know, how to use data systems, continuous quality. There's lots of things we could identify as training needs. And so what OCS is committed to, we held a session at the NASCSP conference earlier this year trying to get a better sense from the states of what the training and technical assistance needs as they see them. We're working with Community Action Partnership to hold a similar listening session in Austin at their conference. What we will do is then take that information and put out some draft priorities for OCS training and technical assistance, and get some comment on that and make sure we're in the right zone with our priorities. What we want to be able to say is this is what OCS plans to do, so that a state can then say, okay, I know what OCS is going to do, here's what I will need to do. And then agencies can say, okay, here's what I'm going to get from OCS, here's what I'm going to get from the state, here's what I'm going to have to do on my own. And because we're going to have, this is a change effort. We're really stepping up, and we didn't make incremental change over time in ROMA, so we're making some massive changes right now. We're going to have to be very strategic about our TNTA. We're not talking a lot about it now because, you know, we will move into that for sure in the next couple months. We definitely understand that there has to be capacity building around collective impact and the use of data and many things. So we're not planning on leaving anybody high and dry. We're going to have a good plan before the end of the year here at OCS. And then we have in our funding opportunity announcements that closed last week, I think, we had, if you haven't looked at what we asked people to respond to for the RPIC funding opportunity announcement and the Center of Excellence, there's a big piece in there about training and technical assistance with the states and with the state association. So fear not, we have a pretty robust effort that will be moving forward in the future.
Plus, as Jeannie mentioned earlier, we have some time to do this. We aren't implementing this next month or next year, so there will be time to do a lot of the training and get everybody on the same page. So I think that's an important piece.
And I think that's a good, quick, this is later on in the question, but timing-wise, these are not happening overnight, that local agencies aren't even projected to have to report on this until 2018. That for the current reporting structure, we're not looking at big changes at all for the current reporting structure. That's going to be due March 2017 and then March 2018.
Right. You're pretty much going to be reporting on your current IS.
Correct.
Except for Module 1, the state, you know, the state will report on their efforts this year, but otherwise things are going to be pretty similar. Should we move to, I think we have time for maybe one more question, then we're going to do some, we'll do some questions and answers online or on the NASCSP site, but we also want to end with a little poll. So let me answer one more question. Which one do we have?
Kate, I think the question about how do I get my agencies to buy into ROMA, I'm having some trouble, is probably an important question. And I want to sort of challenge people to think about data and information and analysis as a profit center instead of a cost center. agencies that have really good data and can make better decisions, who are more strategic in their community action plan, who can articulate outcomes better and can improve, are agencies that are able to grow and learn in the future. Agencies that can't do any of that are going to have trouble maintaining a good, strong financial position and any kind of decent impact. And that's not just, you know, a Fed, you know, saying it because it serves. I think that, you know, across government, the private sector, the public sector, that's what we're seeing. There's no big, huge boatloads of money coming down the river for any of us. And we've got to think about how to, you know, grow our organizations. And I think good data to manage is one way to do that. So I would try to frame it for agencies in a different way. And I would try to also be in partnership, if I'm a state, with my agencies. What is it that they're seeing is not valuable here, and how can we think about making it more valuable together?
And working in coordination with the RPICs and state associations to really provide that localized CNTA as well.
Exactly. Thank you very much for your time and attention on this. We look forward to the next webinar, which is next Wednesday, where we'll talk some more about the individual and family and what we need from you. Thank you very much. Have a good July 4th weekend, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.